Hello there, I'm Colleen MacDonald, and welcome to Crypto Convergence. This week, we will be discussing the convergence of consensus and crypto. But first, before we get started, make sure to go ahead and smash that like button and hit the notification bell so you can be pinged every time we publish a new video. This episode will not be all-inclusive, but it will illuminate some core principles associated with proof of stake and proof of work consensus mechanisms. But as always, since this is a down and dirty on these consensus mechanisms, please make sure to do your own research. Let's get started. Proof of work as a concept was initially proposed by Cynthia DeWork and Mani Nayor in their 1993 paper, Pricing via Processing, or Combating Junk Mail. In this work, the authors outline that, quote, the main idea is to require a user to compute a moderately hard but not intractable function in order to gain access to the resource, thus preventing frivolous use. In this paper, the designers of proof of work indicate that, quote, we have designed an access control mechanism that can be used whenever it is desirable to restrain but not prohibit a resource. This is extremely important for money in our current fiat system. Since money printing simply requires that a bank just opens up a new account for any additional money, it prevents healthy deflation, and it's paramount that any new currency that is used outside of the fiat system has at least this prohibitive or deflationary mechanism so that currency can remain healthy and retain its purchasing power over time. Using this paper, Satoshi Nakamoto repurposed this proof of work concept so that an agreement on the state of the distributed ledger of the Bitcoin protocol could be made. And this distributed ledger is just a detailed account of who owes money to what. So if you could picture it, think about you having a group of friends and, you all pay money for coffee or concert tickets, and eventually it gets difficult to tell who owes what for which activities. So the proof of work consensus mechanism kind of helps this group of friends, or nodes in the case of crypto, to all agree on what the balances on the ledger are among the various participating nodes. So this proof of work concept is continuously happening on Bitcoin, and it's providing economic incentives for the miners, preventing the double spend problem, which is kind of like bouncing a check, scaling the network, and being further prohibited in the future so that the resource doesn't dwindle immediately from hyper-competitive mining practices. So I just said a lot of words, but it's highly likely that nobody actually understands what any of them mean when all combined together. So a quick down and dirty is essentially that computers all over the world are listening to the Bitcoin network, and they are working to compute to find a very large number that is less than the random number that is generated by the algorithm that's being used on the network, which in the case of Bitcoin is the SHA-256 algorithm. So this random number that's generated is referred to as the hash. And so more or less, these computers have to do work outlined by the SHA-256 algorithm to find a number that is slightly less than this hash number. And so everything actually that you do online has some kind of process that's like this. And this is how we communicate our ideas to computers that kind of communicate to each other, because computers communicate in binary language, whereas we obviously communicate with words and symbols. And so we have to translate that information. Okay, great. Everyone with me? Awesome. It's not that hard, right? This is why when you hear people talking about this, they will say something like the computer is solving a puzzle, but it's really not. It's just simply looking for a number that is the correct number, slightly less than that random number generated. It's closer to picking a lottery than it is to like some other puzzle like a crossword or something. And in a lottery, somebody has to pull the numbers, and that's basically what the miners are doing.
Hi, I'm Lori Minetti.
Gone are the days of TV drawings and ball machines.
There we go, and that's our down and dirty of proof of work. So now, what is proof of stake? So proof of stake is a consensus mechanism that was formerly proposed in 2012 by the pseudonym Sonny King and Scott Nadal in their paper PP Coin, which is peer-to-peer cryptocurrency with proof of stake. So in this paper, the authors were actually aiming at building a hybrid model of both proof of work and proof of stake in an effort to solve energy consumption issues that are associated with Bitcoin, even though Bitcoin uses less than half of TradFi energy consumption today. It wasn't until the wonderful Vitalik Buterin and the Ethereum development team that proof of stake was isolated, as Ethereum moved from proof of work to a proof of stake mechanism in an effort that's known as the merge. So for proof of stake, instead of mining blocks, validators are then minting new blocks. So in the case of Ethereum, the reason that it's called proof of stake is because it's now required that in order to become a validator, a deposit of 32 ETH is required to ensure that you have enough skin in the game. Some critics of Ethereum will argue that because of this requirement of the deposit of 32 ETH, that this essentially favors the rich in Ethereum validating practices. But it's important to note that there are large discounts that occur in the economy at scale for the computer and hardware that is required for Bitcoin miners to do the same thing. So there are always going to be some risks of centralization in any system. So validators will then look at the collection of pending transactions and they ensure that the balances and that the transactions themselves are valid. Once they do that, they will then sign off on that block and publish it, gaining a reward for that. So therefore, as long as whatever is staked is higher than whatever the reward is for the block, we can pretty much trust that validators on Ethereum are going to behave honestly. But just in case, to guard against that, Ethereum also has this special provision where if someone decides they no longer want to be a validator anymore, the deposit is time released after they leave the validation pool to ensure that they can't just rug pull and validate a bunch of fraudulent blocks, take their deposits, and run. Now, this is pretty cool for proof of stake because what that means is you can essentially use any amount of ether that you have, put it into a validator pool or into a liquidity pool, and you will get staking rewards for putting up that ether. On the other hand, if you wanted to run a full validating node with Ethereum, that is much more complicated, and it is even sometimes more complicated than, say, programming an entire Bitcoin miner, which has to be programmed with tons of analytics and stuff like that. So on Bitcoin, you can't stake Bitcoin and get a reward for it, but on Ethereum you can. So it gives a little bit more flexibility for regular people. So the other common thing that people have talked about with Ethereum validation is how the validators are selected, because there is a correlation between how much Ethereum is staked and when a validator is selected. So the validator that has more ETH is typically has a better chance of being selected. So they use the Kekkak 256 algorithm, adds a bit of randomness in there into that algorithm so that we can make sure that it is as fair as possible and not always favoring the people who have the largest stacks of ETH. It also ensures that if a validator acts dishonestly, they will be less likely to receive an opportunity to validate in the future because they're going to have less ETH in their stack of deposit as a punishment for validating a block that was maybe dishonest or fraudulent or even mistaken. All right, so there you have it, a quick down and dirty on proof of work and proof of stake on Bitcoin and Ethereum. If you have any questions, go ahead and throw them in the comments, or if you think that maybe I didn't do something justice, let me know. We can do another video on it later. I appreciate all of the feedback. Thank you guys for stopping by on Crypto Convergence, and we will see you next time.